people who are responsible for hiring staff, what lies have you caught applicants in their resumes? One applicant claimed that he had worked as a department head at a local factory for 10 years. This factory had only existed for 7 years, and I knew for sure that there were no department heads. There was one boss, owner, and all employees worked directly under him. The most serious lie on resumes is about languages. In my experience, this has happened a couple of times. If there's one thing you should never lie or exaggerate about on your resume, it's the languages you speak. I've met with job applicants twice for a position where foreign language knowledge was necessary. Not desirable, but necessary. Both times the applicants came to the office, went into the interview, and were completely shocked when I asked them a question in that language. Seriously, screw those people. I can't stand when my time is wasted. And this was a position where not knowing the language created a risk to the life of our client. But I can easily believe that some agencies hire such people without even checking them. I interviewed a man in his 40s who claimed to be a Vietnam War veteran. One guy once wrote that he owned an apple farm in the suburbs. Apparently, this moron didn't even Google what kind of farm to make up, because due to the climate in our country, it's impossible to grow apples. The one I remember the most was a guy who listed a fictitious company that didn't exist as his previous place of employment, which couldn't be found online. He did this to hide the fact that he had developed video players and CMS for an adult gay website. We had a good laugh when we finally pieced together the information and discovered the truth. We hired him with 1000% confidence. He had exactly the experience we needed. As for the fact that he worked for an adult site, though he tried to hide it for unknown reasons, we didn't care about that. We had a guy who wrote on his resume that he was a professional swimmer. This had absolutely nothing to do with the job, but I asked him about it since my sister competed for the same club he claimed to have been part of. When the truth came out, he had the decency to admit he lied, but it led to us no longer considering his candidacy. It did nothing to improve his chances of getting the job and ultimately ruined him. People, let this be a lesson to you. Don't lie on your resumes. People write the strangest lies on their resumes. I work in technology, and people often have to rate themselves in different areas. I've found that almost everyone who chooses the expert level, the highest level, usually turns out to be idiots. In reality, the highest level is very good knowledge, and the word expert is added to identify those who exaggerate their knowledge. If you choose expert, be ready for very serious technical questions about that field, and be ready to fail miserably if you can't answer those questions well. Once I was interviewing a bookkeeping employee who stated on her resume that she calculated employees' salaries at her previous job. She initially passed an interview with my boss, and he really wanted to hire her as soon as possible. I talked to her for a few minutes and asked her to describe her typical workday. I asked this question and asked her to answer as honestly as possible. I highly doubted her honesty. Calculating salaries is a fairly complex process. Of course, it turned out that she only created an Excel spreadsheet where she wrote down the names of all the employees, indicated the hours they worked, and then sent the file somewhere. I was ready to swear she was high, but my boss still wanted to hire her, explaining that he was a man of action. She lasted 5 or 6 days before being fired because she stopped showing up to work after the first 3 days. A few years ago, I had the misfortune of interviewing a guy who was applying for a position on a film set. While there were officially professional HR staff in the film crew, they understood much better how to select employees than what skills were necessary for the job. So less than half an hour before I was supposed to meet this guy, they handed me his resume, which would have made the most shameless, pathological liars blush. According to the resume, this applicant had worked as a consultant in the production of over 100 films, though his name was not credited. Yes, sometimes employees' names are indeed not credited. This has happened even to me, but the scale of this applicant's lies was beyond plausibility. Moreover, In the skills section, the guy listed such skills that one might think he knew the entire film industry inside and out. My favorite was his claim that he was an expert at working with Apple boxes. For those who don't know, Apple boxes are literally wooden crates. And that's it. They come in different sizes and are used when something needs to be placed on top of the crate. Nevertheless, I conducted the interview because I was simply curious to see how he would explain certain skills. It turned out he was possibly around 20 years old. It meant he couldn't have worked on some of the films he listed. When I pressed him, he explained that his consulting consisted of writing letters to the people responsible for producing all these films, in which he offered his suggestions on various topics. Needless to say, I didn't hire him, although I'm sure he added to his resume a point about working on our film as an unofficial consultant, because he came to us for an interview. When we left our last job to start our business, the university asked us to help review all the resumes to find our replacement. This was in Korea. While I don't remember anyone lying on their resume, I was shocked that people used email addresses with nicknames that couldn't be called professional. Seriously, there were people who sent their resumes from email addresses like Sexy Baby 6969 or Mr. Monkey 84, even though they were applying for a university teaching position. Even if your name is Dave Johnson, and the nickname Dave Johnson is already taken, it's better to take the nickname Dave Johnson 5758 than Guys from the Gym or something like that. I interviewed a candidate for a job in the music department who claimed to have a degree in music performance from Yale University. When I asked, "How did you like Woolsey Hall, Yale's main concert hall with a famous organ?" it turned out he had no idea what I was talking about. As a result, our conversation ended immediately. I've been responsible for hiring staff in our company for almost 8 years. I've read many resumes and interviewed many applicants. Here are some examples. 1. A man wrote in his resume that his typing speed, in English, was 500 words per minute. No, that's not a typo. He said he played the piano for many years, so he had fast fingers when I asked him about it during the interview. 2. Did not mention the year he graduated from college. It turned out he dropped out in the first year, and he actually doesn't have a degree. 3. Claimed she was single, though she came to the interview with a wedding ring. Admitted she lied on her resume to get more interview invitations. 4. Lied about her age. She said she was 34 years old, but when we made a copy of her ID, it turned out she was 54 years old. We invited a guy for a technical interview. His resume seemed excellent, but when we asked him about the software listed on his resume, he got very confused. After talking a bit, we and he realized that the recruitment agency employee had sent us his resume, heavily edited. He definitely hadn't done it. He listed all his places of work, provided actual contacts, etc. But the recruitment agency employee added several companies where he allegedly worked, exaggerated his knowledge, added skills he didn't have, and generally turned a good resume into a huge pile of lies. We asked him to call her number, put her on speakerphone, and ask why she did it. She said something like, "Well, honey, you always have to embellish a resume a bit." Then she explained that she knew exactly what skills we needed, so she added a bit to get us to invite him for an interview. And when he said he was afraid he might be asked to use that software, she said, "You have 2 weeks before you start work, right? Just find some online courses." At that point, our VP of HR stepped in. He said her whole conversation was on speakerphone, introduced himself, and listed everyone in the room, and said we would hire the guy. He showed excellent technical skills despite all the lies. But if she even hinted at commissions, we would all go to the state police fraud department the next day and testify under oath about the conversation we just heard. There was a short but piercing silence, then a click, and the conversation ended. We hired the guy. He was a great employee, He worked with us for 3 or 4 years until a client poached him, and we didn't have to pay the recruitment agency for him. Once, we were reviewing a candidate's resume, and it was clear that something was off. After a little investigation using Google, we realized that the entire resume was fake. Essentially, the guy had taken a sample resume from the internet and changed a few details to hide it. The final nail in the coffin was that under current employer, he listed a company that had ceased to exist 2 years prior. We found all this out while he was going through the preliminary interview downstairs. I was told that the next stage of the interview was quite amusing, but unfortunately, I wasn't a part of it. I'm a recruitment specialist, and we were looking for another specialist to join our team. Our boss conducted the preliminary interview and then asked me and my colleague to conduct the final interview since we were the most senior in our department. We work in Alaska. Our boss manages us from Dallas. Anyway, this woman essentially started quoting her resume to us, even though we were sitting 1.5 meters away from her, both holding her resume in our hands. Professional tip: don't do that. At one point, she mentioned that she worked as an HR manager at some company, and we were a bit surprised because her resume stated that she worked as a junior HR analyst. Our company doesn't conduct background checks for new employees, so we made a few calls just to verify her resume information. Turned out, she lied about the time she worked there, as well as about the position. Nevertheless, we hired her because we were short on staff and hoped that at least her personality was good. Boy, were we wrong. She caused so much trouble for us over the next 2 months that we started making bets on who she would anger next. When we finally gathered enough courage to fire her, she tried to prove that she had actually worked in the position she claimed, but we didn't listen to her. She then contacted our boss, who, remember, lives in Dallas, and tried to convince him to keep her. It didn't work. Watch other videos on our channel.